Yo, what's going on, guys? It's Houston Sports Talk back into the video day, and today we're going to be talking about the potential signing for the Milwaukee Bucks of bringing in Chris Paul. It's reported by Shams today that Chris Paul had a conversation with the Bucks. Paul's sorting through options with the interest that he has received from the Suns and the Clippers. The negative thing for Chris Paul on going to the Milwaukee Bucks is, he wanted to be closer to LA. He wanted to be closer to his family. Milwaukee, I think it'd be great to see him and Giannis play next to each other, but that's not really the idea of being close to his kids and his family is why I'm sure it's like his entire family. So if he wants to be close to his family, Milwaukee's a little hard to do that. Phoenix is not exactly being in LA, but it is near the way. It is West Coast. Or near West Coast, and is, at least closer than Dallas which is one team that was interested in him, that, there were some conversations about Dallas and potentially going to Dallas, or the team that, we saw Paul sign with last year and the team he was just on, the Spurs. So, there were teams like the Mavs and now a team like the Bucks that are interested in him being with the Spurs. That is not being close to LA and his family, but Phoenix is a little bit closer. And so, but I think it'd be interesting because the report we've also heard with Chris Paul is he wants to be a starter. He wants to start in this league. And I think we all know he would be a starter in Milwaukee. With them just waiving Damian Lillard, them not really having a real point guard right now to start for them makes you think, okay, Paul would be the starter all season. I think if Dame was still on the roster and was going to come back at some point, it would make you think, okay, well, Paul started off the season, and if Dame does make a March or April return, Chris Paul might have to go to the bench. But Lillard's been waived, so CP3 could be the point guard, off the bench. Would not have to be the point guard off the bench and would just be the starting point guard. Now, I think another interesting thing to talk about, and this is what made me think about this. So I heard someone say something about the argument that Chris Paul and Giannis had earlier in the season, where they got into it a little bit. Because I talked about Giannis potentially getting traded to the Spurs earlier in the offseason. I mean, probably while the conference finals and second round was still going on, was when I talked about this. Probably during the time of the second round conference finals, I talked about Giannis potentially going to the Spurs. I think this was right after the draft lottery, which was during that timeline. And someone said to me that Giannis wouldn't go to the Spurs because Chris Paul was on the Spurs and they got into it last year. And number one, the first thing you could start off with in that comment is Chris Paul is a free agent, so there's no reason for Giannis to be worried about going to Spurs. And also, the one thing I thought of is that both Chris Paul and Giannis Antetokounmpo are very good dudes. I mean, I'm not saying, like, what happened in that situation with Paul and Giannis when they got into it and Giannis snapped the way he did and was ready to fight CP3. It's a rare situation when a good guy and a good guy get into it. Like, it's not often you see CP3 or Giannis get into it with players. Like, Giannis is one of the nicest guys in this league. Honestly, he is. And Chris Paul is not one of the nicest guys in this league if you compare him to Giannis. But Chris Paul in his 20-year career, now this past season was his 20th season, on rarity do you see Chris Paul get into it. He had that one fight with Rajon Rondo to the point where now people call Rondo Chris Paul and call Chris Paul Rondo, but Chris Paul has been a well-respected guy in this league. And so I think both guys would probably be able to get over it in the sake of wanting to win. Chris Paul wants to win a championship, and I know he wants to win it really bad, and I know Giannis wants to win another ring. I don't know if this is an addition where I would look at the Bucks and say they're a championship contender with CP3, Giannis, and Miles Turner. But the one thing and Kyle Kuzma. But the one thing I would look at is Chris Paul, with being such a great facilitator and such a great passer, would be great next to Giannis. That would work like clockwork with how good of a scorer Giannis is and how great of a passer and facilitator Paul is. 7 assists per game last season for Paul in 28 minutes per game. He's still an elite passer, an elite facilitator. And so that would be great playing next to guys like Miles Turner and Giannis. And then, not to mention all the talented three-point shooters on this Bucks team. You've got AJ Green. You've got Gary Trent Jr. There's a lot of talented three-point shooters. Bobby Portis is a really talented scorer and a talented shooter. So there's talented playmakers on this team for Chris Paul to get the basketball to and just continue to be a facilitating god. But for Chris Paul, there are positives. You get to play with one of the greatest players in the world right now in Giannis Antetokounmpo, and that is great. You get to be a starter, which is something you want. And just honestly, I'm going to throw this out there, the Bucks are probably one of his best odds of the championship. That's what I'll say. I really enjoyed watching Paul and Devin Booker together. I think they'd have a solid team, but I don't. If CP3 were to join the Suns, I don't look at them and say they're a championship contender. I think with Chris Paul, Devin Booker, Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, the squad they've got, and Mark Williams, at best, I think they could maybe be a playoff team. But I'd much rather like my chances with a playoff team of Chris Paul, Bobby Portis, Giannis, Miles Turner, Gary Trent, that group in Milwaukee, Kyle Kuzma, that group in Milwaukee, than the group in Phoenix. And then I look at the LA team, I think that'd be a better odd of a championship for Chris Paul. But does Chris Paul really have a chance of starting in LA? James Harden, I always talk about how James Harden has changed in his career. James Harden has went from the more of a selfish scoring two guard who was all about him to being a guy that is now more of a one guard and James Harden is way better he is less selfish than he was. You look as he's gone in his career ever since leaving the Rockets. James Harden has turned into a better. I'm not saying James Harden wasn't a good passer or wasn't a good facilitator in Houston, but I think he's turned into a better passer and facilitator as he's left Houston. And I think Harden as well has become less of a selfish player. And I think that can happen to you when you play next to guys like James Harden has, like where you played in Brooklyn playing next to Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, or you play in Philly playing next to rising star Tyrese Maxey and star Joel Embiid, or you go to LA and you're playing next to Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. You learn how to be, a lot less selfish compared to when you were in Houston. And so Harden, I think, has really taken over the role of being that facilitator and being that amazing guy of controlling the offense in the way of usually James controlled the offense with his scoring. Now he controls the offense with his passing and his facilitating, and he's still a solid scorer, just not as good as he once was before. That role would change for James Harden again if Chris Paul comes into LA and starts, because Chris Paul takes over that role. And I think James Harden would go back to more of the role of where he is that two guard that his job is to shoot the basketball and score instead of facilitating. So and then you've got the drama between Chris and James in the history that they have. So I don't know how much the LA signing would work for Chris Paul. I think his best two options are either to go back to the team where he lost the NBA championship with, or go to the team that he lost the NBA championship against. So, it'd be interesting to see Chris Paul sign with the team that beat him in the only NBA championship he's made it to. And how crazy would it be if Chris Paul finally got that NBA championship with Giannis? Although I think it's unlikely. Let me know your thoughts on the potential signing for the Milwaukee Bucks in the comment section, and peace out.